Vanessa Monroe stepped onto the private jet with her usual composed elegance, though today she had chosen casual attire. A soft cashmere sweater, tailored black pants, and sneakers that had been carefully chosen to appear inconspicuous. She moved with a quiet confidence, every step measured, as if she were just another passenger, blending effortlessly into the surroundings. Yet behind her calm exterior, Vanessa was anything but ordinary. She was a billionaire, a self-made magnate who had built an empire spanning airlines, tech ventures, and real estate, yet she had perfected the art of moving unseen when she wished. Today, she wanted anonymity, a brief escape from the constant scrutiny her wealth attracted. The cabin crew greeted her politely but without recognition, which suited Vanessa perfectly. She scanned the interior, noting the layout and the passengers, all seemingly absorbed in their own conversations. As she approached her preferred seat near the front, she noticed the pilot, a tall man in his 40s with neatly combed hair and a crisp uniform, glancing toward her with a frown. "Ma'am," he called, his voice firm but tinged with unease, "that seat's reserved." Vanessa paused, her brow arching slightly. She had chosen this seat intentionally, wanting to observe the small microcosm of life inside the jet cabin without drawing attention. She smiled softly, a polite curve of her lips that masked the sudden sting of being judged. She could have refused, corrected him, revealed her identity immediately, but she didn't. Today, she would let the lesson unfold on its own. "I see," she replied evenly, her tone neutral but with a subtle undercurrent that made him hesitate. "Would you mind moving to the seat over there?" He gestured to a window seat a few rows back, his body language stiffening as if issuing a command might settle some internal discomfort. Vanessa nodded, rising gracefully. Her movement was smooth, measured, and deliberate, enough to command attention without anyone realizing it. As she walked past the passengers, a few eyes followed her, some with curiosity, some with barely concealed judgment. She noticed a woman clutching a designer handbag, her glance tinged with subtle surprise, and a man in a tailored suit who whispered something to his companion. Vanessa's lips curved into the faintest smile. Assumptions were a curious thing, she thought, a reminder that people saw what they wanted or expected, rarely the truth. Sliding into the suggested seat, Vanessa arranged herself comfortably, pulling out her tablet and quietly checking emails. The pilot returned to the cockpit, the tension visible in his posture as he moved through the motions of preparing for takeoff. Vanessa allowed herself to observe him from the corner of her eye. He was competent, meticulous even, yet the flicker of confusion remained. He had no idea who he had just addressed, and she intended to let him learn that lesson the subtle way she often did, through presence, not confrontation. The cabin lights dimmed as the jet taxied toward the runway. The gentle hum of the engines vibrated beneath her, a familiar sensation that reminded her of countless flights, deals closed midair, and private moments of reflection she rarely allowed herself. She observed the other passengers, noting the hierarchy of attention and the subtle ways humans assumed power or status based on appearance. A young man leaned toward his companion and whispered, likely about her, though she only caught fragments of words rich, "Important, I think." Vanessa remained serene, letting the whispers wash over her. As the engines roared to life and the jet lifted into the sky, Vanessa felt a small thrill, not from the altitude but from the unfolding scene. Here she was, a woman who controlled more assets than most people could dream of, reduced momentarily to a seat swap. And yet in that quiet surrender, she wielded influence more potent than any command she could have issued. She was present, aware, and patient, ready to turn a small act of misunderstanding into a of quiet authority. The flight had only begun, but already Vanessa Monroe had set the stage for a lesson in perception, humility, and recognition. Vanessa adjusted her seat, allowing herself to settle comfortably while maintaining the appearance of quiet composure. She opened her tablet and began reviewing financial reports, each number a familiar rhythm in her life, a testament to the empire she had painstakingly built. She had spent decades creating businesses that spanned continents, negotiating deals that could shift markets, yet here she was, momentarily at the mercy of a simple misjudgment. And strangely, it amused her. Power, she thought, was often invisible until recognized. The pilot, still unaware of whom he had addressed, was about to discover that lesson firsthand. Around her, passengers whispered with barely contained curiosity. A businessman in a gray suit kept stealing glances at her, attempting to decipher her presence. A mother tried to quiet her child but failed, and the child's eyes, wide and inquisitive, met Vanessa's briefly before darting away. Vanessa offered a gentle nod to the child, not patronizing, just acknowledging presence, leaving an imprint of warmth. She enjoyed these small observations, the subtle interplay of human nature, assumptions, and perception. The pilot emerged from the cockpit for a routine check, his expression taut with professionalism, yet a flicker of unease lingered. He served drinks with practiced precision, moving toward Vanessa and glancing briefly in her direction. She returned his gaze calmly, a measured, serene acknowledgement that carried no threat, no overt assertion of superiority. Yet it was enough. A subtle shift occurred in his posture, a hesitation that betrayed recognition without comprehension. He didn't know her identity, but instinctively, something about her presence unsettled him. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her tablet forgotten for a moment as she observed the interactions around her. The whispers of the passengers grew faintly louder, yet none dared approach her directly. Some glanced at their companions with raised eyebrows, subtly questioning the woman who seemed so composed in a room full of assumptions. A young man muttered under his breath, "She's different, confident, something about her." Vanessa caught only the faintest sound, but she allowed a tiny, private smile to play across her lips. People underestimated her as a habit. She had learned to let them. A gentle turbulence rattled the cabin, prompting a few nervous gasps and a subtle murmur. Vanessa, unshaken, returned her attention to her tablet, reviewing an urgent acquisition proposal that would soon reshape one of her companies. She typed rapid responses with calm precision, her focus unbroken, even as the passengers around her fidgeted and exchanged anxious looks. She was a master of composure, and it fascinated her to witness the nervous energy of those who assumed authority merely by volume, by expectation. The pilot glanced again in her direction, a fleeting uncertainty in his eyes. Vanessa met it with quiet assurance. She had learned long ago that the strongest influence was subtle, an invisible force that commanded respect without demand. Her wealth, her accomplishments, even her plain ownership were irrelevant if wielded aggressively. Presence, patience, and poise were far more effective. Today's flight was a reminder. Even those trained to command attention could falter when faced with authenticity and calm authority. As the plane soared above the clouds, sunlight streaming through the windows, Vanessa reflected briefly on her early years. She remembered the boardrooms where she had been dismissed, the investors who refused her ideas, the subtle biases she had overcome with a combination of intelligence and grace. Each challenge had shaped her, teaching lessons about patience, resilience, and strategy. Now she wielded these lessons not in confrontation, but in quiet observation, letting the world reveal its assumptions. Minutes passed, each a slow unfolding of tension and subtle revelation. The pilot adjusted his service cart nervously, caught in an unspoken realization he could not yet articulate. Vanessa noticed the small shifts, the slight stutter in his movements, the fleeting glance of acknowledgement, and she allowed herself a private, satisfied thought. Power, influence, authority, all of it could be conveyed without confrontation. And here, in a confined cabin at 35,000 feet, she was demonstrating it flawlessly. By the time the meal service ended, a subtle transformation had occurred. Passengers who had initially underestimated her now regarded her with a mix of curiosity and awe. The pilot, still unaware of her true identity, carried a seed of understanding that would grow quietly in his mind. Vanessa Monroe, billionaire and strategist, reclined in her seat, serene, observing the subtle chaos of perception around her. already planning the next act in this quiet, invisible lesson of humility and recognition. The flight had reached cruising altitude, the plane gliding smoothly above the patchwork of clouds below. Vanessa leaned back, closing her tablet for a moment, letting herself observe the cabin in its small, self-contained world. Passengers themselves with reading, conversations, or electronic devices, yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent of curiosity, a subtle tension vibrating through the air. Vanessa could sense it without effort, attuned to the unspoken assumptions that flowed in patterns too predictable to escape notice. People judged, speculated, and underestimated, all without understanding the woman sitting quietly among them. She glanced toward the cockpit, where the pilot moved with the mechanical precision of someone accustomed to control. But now there was hesitation in his step, a quiet uncertainty Vanessa found oddly satisfying. He still did not know whom he had confronted earlier, yet he sensed the presence of someone remarkable. The faint tilt of his head, the half-glance, betrayed his internal conflict. In her calm, she could feel his respect, or at least the beginnings of it, without a word being spoken. Influence, she knew, often revealed itself in small, unintentional gestures. Vanessa's thoughts drifted briefly to the early days of her empire. She remembered negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with men who dismissed her because of her age, gender, or race. They underestimated her, laughed at her confidence, or simply ignored her presence. Yet every time she had used patience and strategy, listening more than she spoke, letting their assumptions guide her into advantageous positions. In these moments on the jet, she reflected that the same principles applied in every interaction. Even now, she could turn a minor misunderstanding into a lesson, quietly correcting the imbalance of perception without raising her voice. A soft murmur from a nearby passenger pulled her attention. Two women were whispering, glancing furtively in her direction. Vanessa caught snippets. She carries herself differently. You can tell she's someone important. She allowed herself a small, amused smile. Importance in her world was never merely about title or wealth, it was presence. Her influence didn't need announcements or displays. It flowed naturally from the composure, confidence, and intelligence she exuded. Watching these small reactions, she felt a subtle satisfaction. The quiet realization that she had already begun to shift perceptions, even without revealing her identity, was a gratifying moment of strategy. The pilot emerged from the cockpit again, this time to check on cabin service. Vanessa noticed the subtle stiffness in his movements, a silent dance of caution and courtesy. He approached her with a polite, slightly nervous smile, offering the drink cart. "Ma'am, can I offer you anything?" His tone was professional, yet the hesitation was palpable. Vanessa returned his gaze calmly, serene, yet her eyes carried a quiet authority. She did not speak immediately, letting the brief pause stretch into a small, undeniable statement. Sometimes, silence spoke louder than words, and today, silence was her tool. Finally, she smiled gently. "Water will be fine," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm reassurance that only heightened the unspoken tension. The pilot nodded, retreating with a mixture of relief and uncertainty, leaving Vanessa alone once more in her seat. Around her, passengers were still subtly attentive, watching, wondering. The child in the nearby seat peeked at her again, this time with curiosity rather than awe, a small, innocent reflection of the impression Vanessa left behind. As the hours passed, Vanessa returned to her tablet, reviewing business proposals and contracts while observing the subtle dynamics of the cabin. She noticed small exchanges, glances, tiny details revealing assumptions, biases, and eventual realizations. Each observation was a quiet confirmation. Perception could be influenced without confrontation, respect commanded without assertion. The pilot, the passengers, even the flight crew, were unwitting participants in a lesson she orchestrated silently, demonstrating the power of composure, presence, and strategy. By mid-flight, the tension had shifted. The pilot's furtive glances had become hesitant acknowledgement. The passengers' whispers softened into murmurs of admiration. Vanessa Monroe, seated quietly among them, had subtly transformed the environment without drawing attention to herself. She smiled inwardly, knowing that the journey was far from over. But already, the first act of quiet authority had been delivered, and the stage was set for revelation. The hum of the engines created a steady background rhythm, a comforting constant against the occasional murmurs of passengers adjusting to the flight. Vanessa leaned back in her seat, fingers lightly drumming on her tablet as she toggled between business reports. One glance at the numbers reminded her of the magnitude of her empire, the stakes she navigated daily. Yet in this confined space, far above the clouds, those numbers seemed almost trivial compared to the subtle dynamics playing out in the cabin. Here, perception and influence were in motion, and Vanessa was quietly orchestrating it. Across the aisle, a businessman in his late 40s whispered to his companion, gesturing subtly toward her. Vanessa caught fragments. "She's influential, I can feel it, something about her." She let a small smile flicker across her lips, not of arrogance but of quiet amusement. People underestimated the power of composure, the authority of quiet confidence. A flicker of acknowledgement, a gentle gesture, a calm demeanor, all could wield influence more effectively than confrontation or force. Today, she was demonstrating this truth in real time, with no one aware of her true identity. The pilot emerged from the cockpit again, this time to make a routine cabin check. Vanessa noticed the way his posture had shifted slightly, less rigid, more cautious. He approached her with polite formality, though the unease lingered in the subtle tilt of his head. "Ma'am," he said softly, almost hesitantly, "is everything comfortable for you?" Vanessa regarded him with calm, steady eyes, a serene expression that conveyed acknowledgement without judgment. In that moment, she understood that perception was a slow process, shaped by observation, patience, and subtle cues. Her silence carried authority. A mother sitting nearby struggled to quiet her young child, whose wide eyes kept darting toward Vanessa. The child's curiosity was raw and instinctive, untainted by social assumptions, and Vanessa met the gaze with a small, warm nod. The effect was immediate. The child relaxed, settling against the mother with an occasional glance of admiration. Adults noticed too, some subtly, others more openly. There was a quiet shift in the cabin, a subtle of attention. She could feel it, a wave of awareness spreading, unspoken, as passengers began to reassess their initial judgments. Vanessa's thoughts drifted to the past, to boardrooms and conference tables where she had faced subtle dismissals and open disbelief. She had learned to navigate those moments with strategy, patience, and calm authority. There was a lesson in every interaction. People would underestimate her if she allowed them to, and the greatest victories were often those achieved quietly, without fanfare. Today, she was applying that same principle mid-flight, turning a minor inconvenience, a seat reassignment, into an unspoken demonstration of influence. Her tablet buzzed with notifications, urgent updates on acquisitions, legal matters, and executive decisions. She typed rapid responses, each keystroke precise, efficient, and purposeful, yet her composure never faltered. Passengers observed without understanding. Some watched, fascinated by her focus, while others whispered in curiosity. Even the pilot, stepping cautiously near the beverage cart, seemed to sense the weight of her presence without comprehending why it demanded respect. He moved with care, an unconscious acknowledgement of authority, though he had no idea the scope of the empire seated just rows away. As the hours passed, Vanessa leaned back and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had become a master of subtle influence, shaping perceptions without confrontation, teaching lessons through presence alone. The cabin had shifted quietly around her, assumptions reconsidered, glances altered, murmurs of admiration replacing whispers of judgment. She felt a private satisfaction, knowing that the first stages of recognition and respect were unfolding naturally. And yet she knew the flight was far from over. The pilot's uncertainty remained, passengers were still curious, and the revelation of her true identity had not yet occurred. But Vanessa Monroe, billionaire strategist and observer of human behavior, remained calm, poised, and entirely in control. Above the clouds, she was orchestrating a symphony of subtle influence, her every move measured, her every gesture deliberate. The stage had been set. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight neared its midpoint, casting a warm, subdued glow across the faces of passengers. Vanessa sat upright, her fingers drumming lightly on her tablet, reviewing a financial proposal that demanded her immediate attention. Yet her awareness stretched beyond the screen. She was attuned to every subtle gesture in the cabin, the way the pilot adjusted his posture, the quiet murmur of passengers, and the occasional glance toward her with barely concealed curiosity. She had turned what could have been an awkward moment into a lesson in quiet authority, though no one fully understood it yet. The pilot appeared again, this time pausing near her row as he adjusted his clipboard. His movements were careful, almost hesitant. Vanessa looked up calmly, offering a small, serene smile that carried both acknowledgement and reassurance. He met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment there was a shift, a recognition of something he could not yet articulate. He did not know her identity, nor would he until later, but instinctively he felt the weight of her presence, the authority she exuded without a single word demanding it. Around her, passengers continued to whisper, now less out of judgment and more from curiosity and admiration. One young man leaned slightly toward his, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "There's something about her. She's confident, like she's used to commanding rooms." Vanessa caught the snippet but gave no outward reaction. Instead, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Influence, she mused, was rarely announced. It was observed, felt, internalized. And this moment, the quiet of attention, was a testament to the subtle power of presence. Her tablet buzzed again. Vanessa typed quickly, decisions flowing seamlessly from her mind to the digital page, acquisition approvals, financial adjustments, and legal confirmations. Despite the flurry of activity, her demeanor remained calm, her focus unshaken. Around her, passengers observed, some leaning closer, others casting side glances, sensing the aura of control and composure she carried. Even the pilot's movements had softened, a mixture of caution and professional respect threading through his previously rigid actions. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to act with care in her presence. Suddenly, a minor disturbance broke the rhythm of the cabin. A young woman had spilled her drink and a flight attendant rushed to clean it up, flustered. Vanessa's attention shifted briefly. She caught the eye of the pilot as he approached, gesturing toward the minor chaos. Her gaze was calm, unflinching, and he immediately paused, absorbing the unspoken command of her demeanor. She did not speak, did not direct. Her quiet authority conveyed everything. The pilot subtly adjusted his actions, careful not to overstep, realizing unconsciously that she was not an ordinary passenger. Vanessa reflected on the power of these small moments. She had spent decades navigating boardrooms where similar dynamics unfolded, subtle misjudgments, underestimations, and assumptions based on appearances. In each case, she had leveraged patience, observation, and composure to shift perception and assert influence quietly. This flight, she thought, was a microcosm of her life. The initial seat confusion had become a canvas for demonstrating the impact of presence and poise, shaping attitudes without confrontation or force. As the turbulence of human assumptions settled, a subtle change spread through the cabin. Passengers who had previously dismissed her now regarded her with measured curiosity and respect. The pilot, still unaware of her identity, was navigating this shift with cautious acknowledgement. Vanessa allowed herself a brief, private satisfaction. She had begun turning an ordinary flight into a lesson in humility and perception, demonstrating how power could manifest subtly, invisibly, yet unmistakably. As the plane continued toward its destination, Vanessa reclined slightly, confident in the quiet authority she had asserted. The stage had been set for the next act, the unfolding recognition of her identity and the ultimate revelation of the billionaire who had commanded influence without a word. The soft hum of the jet's engines filled the cabin, blending with the faint chatter of passengers as the plane continued its journey across the country. Vanessa Monroe leaned slightly back, her fingers brushing lightly over the sleek surface of her tablet. She had been responding to urgent emails and reviewing the latest figures from her company, but her awareness stretched far beyond the digital screen. She had become keenly attuned to the nuances of the cabin, the subtle shifts in posture, the stolen glances, the ripple of curiosity among those who had, moments ago, underestimated her presence. The pilot emerged from the cockpit again, ostensibly to check on cabin service, but Vanessa noticed the change in his demeanor. Where earlier he had approached with professional stiffness, now there was hesitation, a quiet acknowledgement of authority he could not yet place. His glances toward her lingered slightly longer than necessary, betraying the unsettled awareness of someone sensing the power of presence. Vanessa met his gaze with serene composure, offering a calm nod that conveyed reassurance while silently asserting control. No words were exchanged, but the pilot's posture straightened subtly, a silent recognition that he was in the presence of someone remarkable. Around her, passengers were slowly catching onto the quiet magnetism she projected. A mother glanced at her child, who had been watching Vanessa with curiosity, and whispered, "She's extraordinary." The child looked again, this time not with innocent curiosity but with a sense of awe. Vanessa allowed herself a small, private smile. Influence, she had learned, was rarely declared. It was absorbed, experienced, and felt. The small ripples of acknowledgement in the cabin were the beginnings of a tide, and she observed it with detached satisfaction. Her tablet buzzed with a new alert, and Vanessa's fingers flew over the keyboard as she made decisions that would shift millions of dollars within minutes. Yet she maintained an air of calm mastery, her focus unwavering. She glanced briefly at the pilot, who was now serving drinks with careful precision, conscious of every gesture, every movement. He did not know why he was suddenly so aware of her presence, but instinctively he treated her differently. He approached with the courtesy reserved for VIPs, unaware that the very plane beneath him belonged to the woman in front of him. The turbulence of human perception continued quietly. A businesswoman in a nearby seat leaned toward her companion, whispering, "She commands attention without even trying. It's like she owns the room." Vanessa suppressed a tiny laugh. In a sense, she did. Her empire, her influence, and her achievements were invisible in this moment, yet the aura she carried could not be ignored. Every gesture, every measured movement was an unspoken assertion of authority. The pilot, the passengers, even the flight attendants, all were subconsciously adjusting to her presence, responding to a force they could sense but not yet name. Vanessa thought of the lessons she had learned in her early years: resilience, strategy, patience. She had faced countless instances of underestimation, prejudice, and outright dismissal, each encounter refining her understanding of human behavior. Now, she applied those lessons in the confined microcosm of the plane, orchestrating perception through subtlety. The pilot's hesitations, the passengers' curious glances, the quiet acknowledgement of influence, all were proof that power could manifest without loud proclamation. As the plane cruised closer to its destination, Vanessa felt the tension in the cabin shift, a subtle but unmistakable change. The pilot's furtive glances had become tentative acknowledgement, passengers had adjusted their assumptions, and a quiet reverence had begun to permeate the space. She reclined slightly, serene, knowing that the moment of revelation was approaching. Soon the truth of her identity, the billionaire who owned the very plane they occupied, would be unveiled, transforming this ordinary flight into an extraordinary lesson in humility, perception, and respect. The announcement from the cockpit signaled the approach to the destination, and the cabin stirred with quiet anticipation. Passengers adjusted their belongings, stretched lightly, and glanced toward the front, some exchanging speculative whispers. Vanessa Monroe remained calm, serene, her posture effortless yet commanding. She had navigated countless boardrooms, high-stakes negotiations, and public scrutiny, but moments like these, small, unassuming, yet filled with subtle power, were among her favorites. Here, the pilot and the passengers were unknowingly participating in a demonstration of quiet authority, and she watched with detached amusement as the layers of assumption slowly peeled away. The pilot emerged from the cockpit for a final cabin check, moving cautiously, almost reverently. His glances toward Vanessa lingered longer than usual, a mixture of curiosity, hesitation, and dawning realization in his eyes. He stopped briefly at her seat, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, may I ask, his voice faltered. Vanessa looked up, her expression calm, almost maternal in its composure, but her eyes held a spark of subtle amusement. "Yes," she prompted softly, her voice even, patient, leaving him no room for uncertainty. He swallowed, adjusting his posture, finally speaking in a measured tone. I didn't realize, I wasn't aware that." Vanessa inclined her head slightly, waiting for him to find the courage to complete his thought. The pilot's gaze flicked around nervously, aware that the other passengers were watching, curious, sensing a moment of revelation. She remained still, a composed figure of poise and quiet authority, allowing the moment to build. The tension was palpable, yet controlled, exactly as she intended. A few passengers had begun to notice the interaction, subtle curiosity blossoming into suspicion. Whispered words spread. "Who is she?" She owns the plane." "No, that's impossible." Vanessa allowed a faint, private smile, recognizing the gradual shift in perception. The power of presence, she thought, was far more effective than any announcement or confrontation. She could see, feel, and manipulate the subtle currents of acknowledgement flowing around her, guiding understanding without force or fanfare. Finally, the pilot exhaled, speaking with hesitant respect. "Ma'am, I understand now. You own this plane." Vanessa nodded once, serene and unflinching. The acknowledgement settled like a quiet wave across the cabin, and even the most skeptical passengers exchanged glances, realization dawning. Some mouths opened in astonishment, others simply leaned back in silent awe. The young child nearby stared wide-eyed, fascinated not by wealth, but by the composed authority Vanessa projected effortlessly. The flight attendants approached cautiously, offering polite smiles tinged with recognition. Passengers now regarded her differently, a mix of admiration, respect, and disbelief. Vanessa Monroe had transformed the cabin's atmosphere without confrontation, without raising her voice, simply by existing fully in her power. She had turned an ordinary flight, a routine of seat assignments and casual interactions, into a subtle lesson on humility, perception, and respect. Every glance, every whisper, every hesitant movement had been part of a quiet orchestration of acknowledgement. The pilot finally relaxed slightly, though a lingering awe remained. He offered a polite nod, the professional mask intact but softened by recognition. Vanessa returned the gesture with calm dignity, her eyes conveying both understanding and grace. She had taught the unspoken lesson without humiliation, without anger, leaving an impression that would linger far beyond the flight. As the plane began its descent, passengers prepared for landing, conversations subdued yet animated with speculation and admiration. Vanessa reflected on the moment, pleased with the subtle orchestration of perception. She had revealed her identity not through force, but through presence, patience, and quiet authority. In the confined cabin, at 35,000 feet, she had demonstrated the transformative power of composure and self-assurance. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac, the cabin atmosphere had shifted completely. Passengers regarded her with newfound respect, the pilot now fully aware of whom he had addressed. Vanessa Monroe, billionaire, strategist, and master of subtle influence, had turned a simple flight into an unforgettable lesson in power, perception, and dignity. The wheels of the jet kissed the runway with a gentle thrum, the plane rolling smoothly as it taxied toward the terminal. Passengers gathered their belongings, a quiet buzz of conversation filling the cabin as realization settled fully. Vanessa Monroe remained seated for a moment, serene, allowing the final moments of the flight to complete the subtle transformation she had orchestrated. The pilot's eyes met hers one last time, a mixture of awe, respect, and lingering disbelief. This was no ordinary passenger, and the acknowledgement of her power had settled like a quiet weight in the cabin. Vanessa rose gracefully, her movements calm and deliberate, projecting the same quiet authority that had guided the flight from takeoff to landing. She nodded briefly to the flight attendants, who had subtly adjusted their demeanor throughout the journey, now fully aware of the woman they had served. Her presence had reshaped their understanding of influence and respect without a single word of confrontation. The cabin, once a scene of whispered assumptions, had been transformed into an arena of recognition and subtle admiration. The pilot approached cautiously, stepping forward as if unsure how to navigate the encounter. "Ma'am," he said finally, his tone subdued, "I owe you an apology and my thanks. I had no idea who I was addressing earlier." Vanessa regarded him with calm, unwavering eyes. "It's all right," she replied softly, her voice carrying warmth and authority simultaneously. "Assumptions are natural. It's what we do with the realization that matters." Her composed response left him visibly moved, a quiet understanding settling in. Respect had been earned, not demanded. Passengers lingered in their seats a moment longer, some stealing glances at her, others whispering in hushed tones. A few timidly approached to offer polite acknowledgments, a subtle recognition of her impact. Vanessa smiled faintly, gracious but reserved, allowing them space to internalize the lesson of humility and perception she had delivered. Influence, she thought, was most powerful when it worked quietly, leaving a lasting impression without overt display. As she stepped off the plane, the sun glinted off the tarmac, highlighting the effortless elegance of her stride. Staff and crew moved aside, allowing her passage, aware now of her significance. Cameras flashed from a distance, reporters capturing the presence of a figure who had commanded respect with nothing more than calm authority and poise. Vanessa acknowledged them with a small nod, her attention focused elsewhere. She was never one to seek the spotlight. Her power lay in subtlety, precision, and unshakable confidence. The pilot remained at the front of the jet, watching her go, the realization of her identity and influence sinking in fully. He adjusted his uniform, straightened, and exhaled deeply. The encounter had left him with a lasting impression, a quiet demonstration of respect, power, and composure that no words could replicate. Passengers now shared quiet smiles, exchanged glances, and spoke in low tones about the extraordinary woman they had just met. The ordinary flight had become a lesson none would forget. Vanessa walked toward her waiting car, her staff already ready to accompany her. As the doors opened, she paused, looking back at the jet with a faint smile. A simple seat reassignment had become an orchestration of authority, patience, and perception. She had turned assumptions on their head, teaching humility without anger, commanding respect without assertion, and leaving everyone who crossed her path with an unforgettable impression. Settling into the car, Vanessa allowed herself a brief reflection. Each interaction, each small gesture, each silent acknowledgement had been part of a deliberate strategy she had perfected over decades. Today had been another demonstration. Influence was subtle, power invisible, and presence undeniable. She leaned back, gazing out at the skyline ahead, already considering her next move in business and life. The flight had ended, but the lesson she imparted would ripple far beyond the tarmac. Vanessa Monroe, billionaire and strategist, had once again transformed a simple moment into a profound statement of authority, grace, and perception.